Okay, last week, and I'll try to catch up Cody and Haley as well as we kind of just do a little bit of a briefing of where we are here. We talked about the tribulation period. Can you see that? Can y'all see that? We talked about the tribulation period, and I divide this out into the tribulation period, which is the first 3.5 years, and the Great Tribulation, which is the last 3.5 years, because of what Jesus said in the book of Matthew, being the Great Tribulation. Also said another very important point that I think is worthy of mentioning again, that at the middle point of the tribulation period, I believe if you look at Revelation chapter 15 verse 8, that at this point there will be no more opportunity for salvation after this point. So the warnings have been very, very clearly proclaimed by the angel, and the alternatives are absolutely unmistakable at this point. It's either you're going to worship me, which the beast will cry, or be doomed, or the Lamb is going to say, worship me, or be damned. So either one, if you don't worship the Lamb of God, if you don't follow Jesus and God, then obviously you're going to be doomed for an eternity in hell, or the next vile judgments or bowl judgments that are coming up. And of course, obviously the Antichrist is sitting there at this time saying, worship me, or you're going to be killed. So those are going to be the two factors that people are going to be dealing with at this time. Now, as I said earlier, this is I've used this a lot, and I told you when we began this that Clarence Larkin is one that I have always felt that had a fairly accurate timeline of events. He does exactly like what I do, and I looked at the book of Revelation where John had written it, and we took exactly how he said it happened, and now Clarence Larkin does the exact same thing here. Let me just point out a few things as we're looking at this. And I know there's a lot on this. Clarence Larkin, none of his original drawings were in color because it was back in the early 1900s. But you see here that you have the rapture of the church, and it comes up here, and now this is what's going on in heaven. So you have the sun-clothed woman, the middle of the week happens right here. This is the 7-year period that we've been talking about, which is started out with the 7 seal judgments at the very beginning. And they were all basically based upon Israel here, or this interval here with Israel. It did affect the entire world, but remember, this whole period of time is specific to the children of Israel so that he can have his judgment towards them. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about this 7-year period that Daniel spoke about in his prophecy. When we get to the middle of the week, prior to that, we had the 7 trumpets, which happened in chapter 8, verses 6 through 11. And then again in chapter 19, you have all of the trumpets. In the middle, you have the dragon, which he was cast out of heaven. That's Satan. And I said before, and I'll say it again, prior to this time on earth, Satan had access to the throne of God, which is interesting because we don't think about that very often, do we? We don't think about Satan being able to approach the throne of God, but we see that in the book of Job, where he went up to talk to God at the throne to talk about Job. So he had access back and forth. But until this time, at the midpoint of the week, no longer will Satan be able to approach the throne of God. And when he's cast out of heaven, he's going to focus all of his anger at this point on the children of Israel. And so that wrath is going to start. We talked also about the 3 messenger angels, and we spoke a little bit about that last week. I'm not going to go into that too terribly much. But now we're here talking about the bowl judgments, or the vile judgment that the angels pour out on the world. And we got up to 5 last week, but what I'm going to do is quickly go back, and we're going to talk just very briefly about some of these bowl judgments that are going to be poured out. One other thing I want to mention before we dive in here. After the messenger angels that you see there, the preparation is going to be made in heaven for the harvest and the vintage of the earth. And so he's going to begin to harvest things out. Now, this is not the harvest of the church. I want to make that absolutely clear. That took place because my opinion is that the rapture happens at the beginning of the tribulation period. How many of you were in church on Sunday morning, last Sunday morning? Did you hear what the preacher said?
Yes.
What did he say?
Happened at the beginning.
He thinks it happens a little bit after it starts.
A little bit after it starts. Now, do you remember why I say I don't think it happens then? And I'm okay with that. It doesn't matter to me if you want to say that it happens after the beginning of the tribulation period within the first couple of years, if you want to say it happens in the middle. We're not here to argue that. Because there are supporting facts on all of these, and I definitely respect people like Clarence Larkin and John Phillips and all of these people who have studied years and years and years on this, where I've studied, 6 months at the most. So please don't think that I say it's got to be this way when we stand up here and talk about it. But the preacher did say it happens after the beginning of the tribulation period. And now, in the past, I've said that it happened prior to the beginning of the tribulation period, right? Because my thinking is that it has to have a period of time where the 10-nation federation is already established at this point. That the Antichrist is already on scene when it happens. And now, if he comes as a thief in the night, and we know that a 10-nation federation is there, and we know that the man of perdition has already begun to appear, then we know an exact time of when things are going to happen at that. Now, we may not know when the rapture exactly is going to happen, but we know a particular timeline, which makes it a little more difficult for me to say that it happens after the beginning. Now, Randall's giving me a scrowl. What are you going to say? And like I said, please understand, if you believe that it's a year or two after, if you believe it's at the beginning, if you believe it's in the middle or at the end, I'm okay with that. Please, it's just, you can study and find supporting evidence for all views in that. Okay, so this being the case, so he's going to harvest the Gentile nation, or they're going to begin this harvest during this the last half, and it begins with the pouring out of the vials, and this part ends with the Battle of Armageddon. As I said last week, the nature of what's coming here, the wrath that God is going to deal upon the godless world, is absolutely incomprehensible, the amount of damage that's going to take place in this last period of time. I zoomed in. I was like, what is that next slide? But it's a zoom in. I forgot I did that. Now remember that the 7 angels are going to come with bowls that are going to be poured out of wrath, or poured out that is the wrath upon God. Now remember I said last week, if you look at verse 1 in chapter 15, then I saw another sign in the heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is finished. After this I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was opened, and out of the sanctuary came 7 angels with the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes around their chest. And then he says, then I heard with a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, go and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls of the wrath of God. The first bowl was sores. Here now the time had arrived for those who weren't believing in God, who were believing Satan, for them to pay the price of what they had. So you have in the entire world at this point who is believing in believing in Satan, who are going to have these awful sores all over them. And it's specific to those who worshiped the beast. Notice that. We still have a group of individuals on earth who do not follow the beast and who are going to be taken from the tribulation period, that 7-year period, directly into the millennial reign. Okay, so those people that are going to go directly in are those who do not worship the beast. The second one, he poured out the bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing died that was in the sea. We spoke a little bit of speculation last week on what this actually meant, but we know the result is absolutely certain, which is that all of the life in the sea will become extinct. We know that for certain, right? You know it will become extinct. And then we also mentioned very briefly that whether it's the Mediterranean or the entire ocean, I will leave that up to you to decide which one you feel like it is. The third bowl that was poured out. Now it was specific upon the waters, the drinking waters per se. You can scarcely imagine the panic that you can then have on earth after all the water supplies are now contaminated and beyond use. And here's where we left off last week. The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was allowed to scorch people with fire. They were scorched by the fierce heat, and they cursed the name of God who had power over these plagues. They did not repent, nor did they give him glory. The heat of the sun, we don't know, will be increased in some way, shape, fashion. But the energy that the sun is going to pour upon the earth is going to be absolutely tremendous, to where they can't even imagine being out in the sun. And they will, what is interesting here, blaspheme God as the author of these plagues. Finally, here on the fifth plague, after the sun is scorching, I want you to notice that it says the fifth angel poured out. But what I failed to mention last week, and as I was going back and kind of reading over my notes, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I said that this one, part of this bowl judgment was specific for the entire world. And I wanted to clarify exactly what it said. So let's read this. The fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast. Okay, so it's very specific of where this one was poured out. And I think I said last week that, because it was in my notes that way, and it was probably just because I was typing really fast, that it included the entire earth. But this is specific about where this one is poured out. And so this fifth plague is outpoured, and it's this unnatural darkness is going to grip the kingdom of the beast. Now, where is that? I'm not certain. I don't know if you could say it's right over Israel. I don't know if you could say it's over his political capital in Babylon. I am just not certain. But we know that this is specific to this particular part of the world. This darkness comes. And also on the throne of the beast will come under divine attack for the first time. For the first time we see that he now is attacked. His impotence to defend either himself or any of the subjects against these divine visitations are going to be completely obvious to the entire world. And which is going to be interesting, because at this point he's going to be powerless to ward off any kind of judgment, just as like the Pharaoh was during the days of Moses. He's not going to be able to do anything about it. So the plague will also be the suffering dimensions, that these men will begin to gnaw their tongues because of the pain that they are going to experience. Now, Chad and I spoke last week, or I think all of us were here when we said, have you ever bitten your tongue? It just makes you want to cry. Could you imagine, just to get rid of the other pain that you're experiencing, that you bite your tongue just to get rid of the other pain that you're going through? You have sores, the fierce heat. It's just going to be an absolute time that you are miserable. There's no escaping it.
Can you imagine being in so much pain that you bite your tongue and then pour alcohol on it just to kill the pain?
Just to kill the
I mean, that is just
That was
crazy
just, who would do that?
Like rubbing alcohol.
Rubbing alcohol.
Pain is on it.
Painful. Here's where we left off last week. So we find here, if you go back to the book of Daniel, chapter 11, verse 44 through 45, something happens that's pretty tremendous in the whole grand scheme of what's going on. And if you look at that, it says, "But the news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and vote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tent between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him." The glamour that the beast has had up until this point is disappearing at a rapid rate, because you have the entire world that is worshiping him still suffering, and they're looking for someone to save them, to someone to help them, and nothing is happening. Remember that when he came on the stage, he was very charismatic. He was going to be the guy who saved the world, who brought everyone together. And as a matter of fact, next week we're going to talk about the universal church that we see coming up because of the beast. We're going to see that in the past he had this attribute to bring the whole world together. You weren't able to even go against the beast because he was such a prolific speaker. He was very, very persuasive when he spoke, and so the whole world begins to follow him. But now he's not able to do anything to help these people out that have followed him so faithfully up until this point. He's no longer going to be the person that he was. But what happens because of this verse here that you see back in the book of Daniel is that people are beginning to rise up. You're going to see, just like the old Roman Empire, where now the beast has one empire. The entire world has begun to follow the beast. It's now going to start becoming unhemmed and unsown to where it begins to fall apart. Notice it says the eastern nations break off allegiance to him and confederate against him. They start building up. Now, who are the eastern nations that he could possibly be talking about? When you're talking about Israel, when you're talking about Rome, when you're talking about Babylon, who is to the east of there that would be a formidable nation to rise up against the Antichrist and his 10-nation federation, which is basically the European people at this particular time?
China, India, Japan, Korea.
That's it. Absolutely. When you think about those nations, think about those specific nations that have the power. China specifically, the nuclear power. Japan has the wisdom and the knowledge and the ability to fight. A lot can happen here. So think about this when you go back to the book of Daniel. These Eastern nations, who, by the way, were latecomers to all of this, the whole beast empire, they were coerced in one way or another to become part of the nation of the beast. But now you see them rising up, and they're going to challenge the beast world empire. Notice this goes into the sixth plague in Revelation chapter 16, verse 12 through 16. The sixth angel poured out a bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up. The very last part of this is the most important. The reason the water was dried up is to prepare for the kings from the east. This coincides exactly with what Daniel spoke about many years prior to John seeing this vision. So you see the river Euphrates. Now, is this going to be literal, or is this going to be the opposite of literal? What is it? Symbolic. Figurative. Symbolic. I would go with symbolic, right? The river Euphrates dry up. What's your guess? What have you heard? Some of you may have studied this in the past.
You dried up through dams. Well, we talked about in the prophecy class.
Dried up through dams.
Use of dams.
I've read a lot on this to try to figure out exactly, because it is a very formidable river. I mean, you're talking about in places 35 feet deep, and it's about, in some places, well, I forget the number, a mile wide in some places. It's a very, very, very large river. Now, in ancient times, a river of this nature was obviously a very formidable obstacle to any kind of advancing army. But in today's time, and I told you I didn't want to get into a lot of speculation, how much of an obstacle is a river in today's time for the armies and nations of the world? It's not at all. A river is just really a nuisance, right? A little gnat in the hole. But if we take it literally, what the Bible says, which is what sometimes I think we need to do in this instance, is that it's going to dry up. However that happens, I don't know. But whether you take it as symbolic or whether you take it as literal, I don't know, but the effect is the same. Whatever there is that's holding the eastern nations back at the river of Euphrates, it's now no longer going to be there. One article which I found more interesting than maybe some of the others is that the presence of the Middle East world has been held back or separated here by Britain or the United States or Russia right here at this river. So whatever is keeping it separate is not going to be there anymore. So you have whatever that barrier is, whether it be the river, whether it be Another nation is no longer there, and the beast, his faltering power here, that you will, because of this fifth plague, it's going to give them an opportunity to cross over that river, clearing the way for the kings and for the battle of Armageddon, which is exactly what we're preparing for here.
You have to look to it, everything that's happened up to this point, it may have made satellites useless, it may have made all types of mechanical, it may bring it back to primitive, to its man on man. It's everything may become kind of irrelevant because you got things happening, your satellites become useless. That takes a lot away from
Your advantages,
stuff like that.
technology, whatever the case may
Technology
be.
may be way gone by this because of all the different things that's happened at that point. So it may be a man to man.
So
Absolutely.
is the river, is it blood at this point? Is it part of the freshwater?
Apparently, you would consider that because it's right
So
there in
wouldn't
the
that make
heat
a
of it.
difference too?
Would it make a difference?
I mean, doesn't blood drop a little different than water does?
No, that's a good thought, Jeff. That's a good thought. That's a good point. I have no idea. I have no idea. Like I said, I hate to get into a lot of speculation because we can run those rabbits as far as we want, and I don't know that that's exactly what the point is. The point is, to stay on track, is that whatever is holding the Eastern nations back is now no more, so that they are going to have direct access to the Antichrist and his armies in that federation, that 10-nation federation. So keep that in mind. That is the whole point of this. Here's where things get interesting. We see 3 frog-like demons coming forth by the dragon. Read Revelation chapter 16, verse 13. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 mouths, 3 unclean spirits like frogs, for they are demonic spirits, performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for the battle on the great day of God the Almighty. 3 frogs. Let's make sure we understand what is their purpose. What is the purpose of the demon-like frogs? Are you hot, Patrick? This is not a trick question.
This is to gather all the leaders and rulers.
Thank you, Lord. That is that's what I was going to make. That's exactly right. Their purpose is to assemble all of the kings of the entire world to this battle of Armageddon. So we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. They're going to go out to bring all of these armies to the battle of Megiddo. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
I thought so. So I've tried to think about here. I hate to think or speculate much, but when John was viewing this or seeing this vision, what is the symbolism here of the frogs and the demons? What do frogs have to do with what the purpose of these demonic spirits were? Why did they seem frog-like? To me, a frog's pretty harmless. Right?
Maybe that's the point.
Maybe that's the point. What does a frog have that's an asset to him?
Good
Or
tongue.
her? It's quick, isn't it? What's the purpose of these demonic spirits? Relate it back. Is to convince the entire world. So when you have to have a quick tongue, you have to be fast, because a frog is fast if you've ever tried to catch a frog, right? It's going to be to quickly convince the nations of the world that they need to come to the Battle of Armageddon, right? So, 3 things that I thought about on these frogs. First of all, they catch their prey with their tongue, so lying tongue. They're very swift, like I said, and finally, they're cold-blooded. Okay, those are the 3 things I thought about when I thought about a frog and trying to get all this together. Just a crazy thought of mine. Okay, random thoughts by Jeremy, gone away. They're working miracles here, these demonic spirits. They're deluding men, they're inciting nations, they're dangling this idea of victory over the Antichrist. They're inflaming passions. These are words that I kind of just were coming up with. Stirring up the world. They're summoning together countless armies of the entire world, especially in the East and the West, where obviously they're bringing them all together. Now, let's finish this up before we've got just a few minutes and 2 slides. He says, behold, I am coming like a thief. What does that mean? Behold, I am coming like a thief. It should tell you one thing.
Not gonna know when.
Not going to know when. It's going to know really quick, right? So now they're thinking it has gone from being imminent to being immediate, right? I am coming. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeps his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be exposed. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So what's interesting is that behind the demonic activity is who? God himself. Which is interesting, right? Because he is assembling all of these people to Armageddon. So even though they're demonic spirits, God is still controlling it and making it happen exactly like he wants it to happen. He's coming as a thief, so it's going to be a surprise. Those saints who are still present on earth, they are now told that the Lord's coming is coming very, very quickly, and they need to be ready. The nations are deluded by the purposeful will of God. It's merely that he is permitting this convergence of nation because he's planning on it. It's so interesting to me that even with all the demons that are going on, even with as bad as things are in the world at this particular time, God is playing it just like he intended it to happen. Exactly like he intended it to happen. So they're all getting ready, getting ready for this battle in Armageddon. Finally, the 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, such as there had never been since man was on earth. So great was that earthquake that the great city was split into 3 parts, and the city of the nations fell, and God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. And every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found, and a great hailstorm, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people, and they cursed God for the plague of hail because the plague was so severe. Cursed God. Several times God has mentioned in the Bible that it is done or it is finished. Can you name another time? When was another? There was one more specific that just come to me right like that this morning.
Didn't he say in the beginning of time?
In the beginning of time, on day 7, right?
Yeah.
It is done. 3 times. With the coming of the 7th plague, the way is paved for the return of Christ and the end of man's abuse of this planet. And once again, he goes out and he says, it is done. So once it's poured out, it's over with. We're going to specifically talk about the next 2 chapters, maybe the next 2 Sundays. We're going to talk about Babylon. For some reason, John interjects here. Remember when I said we were talking about Revelation, it goes to a forward view and then it goes to a current view. And then we have to fit this in, but we're going to speak about Babylon the Great. 17 and 18 in that chapter is exactly what he's talking about. And that's the political capital, but apparently God wanted him to know specifically what was going to happen here. So we're going to talk about that next week. We're also going to talk about what I feel is going to be the new world church that's going to come about when the Antichrist comes on the throne. Questions, comments? I know I spent a lot of time in review today, but I kind of wanted to bring everybody together, and I could not stop right in the middle of what we're going to talk about next week of the lesson. I couldn't find a good place to stop. So we'll pick up next week. Questions, comments? Anything? So glad to have y'all. Like I said,